It has been now more than 7 months since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Fair to say that the war has not gone at all the way Russian President Vladimir Putin had envisioned it. And the U.S. continues to show its willingness to provide Ukraine with just about whatever support is necessary. Joining us this afternoon, Brad Bowman. He's a senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and he has been someone to whom we have turned in the past for some perspective on what's going on, and we're doing that today. Brad, thank you. Good to have you with us. It seems to me, and tell me what you think, if we're in sort of a transitional phase right now. Russia has changed its tactics. While they continue to quickly evacuate some of those eastern provinces that they were occupying earlier in Ukraine, apparently pulling their military forces back, they're also apparently rounding up some civilians there and taking them we don't know where precisely and are worried for their safety. But we're also hearing, for example, that there are Iranian advisors on the ground nearby, not either in Russia or Ukraine, but showing the Russian military how better to use the drones that they've sold them that have done so much. Is this Vladimir Putin getting ready for the long winter and maybe the long game here?
You know, thanks for the opportunity to join you again, and thanks for the question. I think Russia is learning some things as they go along. As poorly as their forces have performed, there does appear to be some learning happening. And one example I would point to is, the situation in Kharkiv was just disastrous for Russian forces. The retreat that they did was so disorderly. It was embarrassing, and they sustained a lot of losses that they could have avoided had they done a more deliberate retrograde or retreat. It seems that those difficulties are informing what we're seeing right now around Kherson and more in the south. And there's evidence to suggest that despite probably Vladimir Putin's reluctance, you see Russian forces on the west side of the Dnieper River starting to pull soldiers and materiel across the east side to try to avoid what will become potentially an untenable position for them on the west side of the Dnieper River because of the counteroffensive the Ukrainians are undertaking. But that's a little awkward for Putin, right? Because that's one of the 4 provinces he supposedly controlled and annexed.
Now part of Russia
at the time, and now his forces are retreating even more. So let's talk about awkward, right?
It absolutely is. The other thing is we are seeing these increased drone strikes on the major population centers in Ukraine with the notion of knocking out power supplies. You do that because you're coming into the colder months, and there's always been winter and all the other seasons in this part of the world, and winter is particularly difficult if you don't have electricity or you don't have the means to heat homes and to provide running water and those sort of basic services. And it does seem like that's one way. You talked about the learning process that, well, maybe if you can't win the war on the ground, you win it, or at the very least, you break the spirit in other ways.
So right. There's multiple things going on here. We know that the Russians were running low on some munitions, particularly the precision-guided munitions. And so they were looking anywhere they could look for help. And it turns out, where are they getting that help? They're getting it from the Islamic Republic of Iran. So as many of us have been saying for a while, that they were exploring getting the Shahed 136 drones, a smaller version of that, as well as another unmanned combat aerial vehicle. And there's now a good reason to believe all of those, despite the statements of the Iranian foreign minister, which are frankly outright lies. Those are in Ukraine as we speak, and they're being used to target, among other things, civilian infrastructure, including the power plants and things you talked about. This is a deliberate effort to exhaust the Ukrainian people, to wage war against them and try to break their will in defending their homes, while also trying to incentivize the Ukrainian forces to pull back some of their forces from their counteroffensive in order to defend some of their civilian infrastructure. So it's kind of a double whammy, if you will, inflict suffering on the Ukrainian people, try to break their will to fight, and then also putting pressure on those forces to pull back from their offensives, thereby weakening those Ukrainian counteroffensives and forcing them to reallocate finite resources, obviously air and missile defense being the foremost among them.
Brad, this has been a conflict that has sort of defied conventional wisdom at every turn. The original notion was, be careful, the overwhelming force and numbers and materiel of the Russian army would sweep across at least part of Ukraine. Well, it worked for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden it didn't work. Does all this indicate to you a longer conflict and maybe the sort of war of attrition, if you will, to try and at the very least give Russia a little time to figure out what their next move is and maybe at some point sue for peace?
You know, Russia has sustained incredible casualties here. Their armed forces are weaker than they've been in decades. This has not gone well for Moscow, period. And you're exactly right. How poorly they have performed have surprised many. But with all that said, I see no indication of Putin backing down. Mm-hmm. I mean, the best way to end this war is for Moscow to end its unprovoked invasion and go home and leave Ukraine as sovereign territory as it is under international law. But I see no sign of that. I see them doubling down at every turn. So what's to be done? Well, I think all paths forward have risk, especially with Putin's nuclear saber rattling. But I think the least dangerous path and the path that best honors democratic principles and America's interests is continue to arm Ukraine, to give them the means they need to defend their homes against this unprovoked invasion, while making clear to Vladimir Putin that we do not have designs on Russia proper, and we do not have a problem with the Russian state. What we do have a problem with is trying to redraw international borders by force.
Brad Bowman is the Senior Director at the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And he is a very keen-eyed observer of the condition. That's one of the reasons that we've been calling on him from time to time to give us his perspective, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for your time this afternoon, Brad.
Thank you.
Step away for just a bit. Back with the rest of the afternoon's news and an update for you on the weekend forecast. Some changes there, too.